thanking our sponsors first. We want to have a slide go by for those of you who are on the call now. We have our platinum sponsors. We have our gold sponsors. Thank you for supporting us. We also have our silver sponsors. Thank you for, and then we also have our bronze sponsors. Thank you everybody who's supporting our chapter and helping us produce webinars like this for our members and for the community. So we really appreciate our sponsors helping us. And for those of you who are looking for more sponsorship opportunities, please feel free to reach out to me, myself, Francisco Williams, president for CCIM Greater Los Angeles, and let us know. We're doing more and more webinars, and we're reaching out to more and more sponsors to be able to facilitate these type of conversations and to provide the value to our membership in a way that can help them during this COVID crisis. So if you have something that you really want to share that can really help our membership, we're definitely open to discussion. So reach out to us. So first and foremost, we want to welcome everybody to the virtual roundtable for property management. We are the CCIM Greater Los Angeles chapter, and we have some amazing professionals for you today that are going to be able to talk about property management in Los Angeles, in LA County, and various other counties that they also operate in, to be able to share some of the insight that they've experienced during this crisis, and also be able to have a conversation with our membership. As you are all seeing the format, this is not like a webinar format. This is a discussion format where we're a roundtable, where you're going to be able to interact and speak with our speakers about specific items and have more of a dialogue, a roundtable discussion, as if we were in a room together. So we have some housekeeping rules that we'll share with you very briefly. Everybody's going to be muted. For those, DJ will have our chapter admin is DJ. Her name is DJ, and she will have the ability to mute you and also unmute specific folks that want to have questions or want to speak up. You will use the chat dialogue. The chat, we have a chat that's inside. If you're familiar with Zoom, you will see that there's a chat box that's available. And we will be able to, you'll be able to ask questions on the chat and make sure you address it to specifically the host, CCIM Greater Los Angeles. Either the host or co-host, you want to share your question and your name so that DJ or Aika, whoever's our co-host, they will both mention your name and say, for example, Francisco has a question, and this is the question, or you can say, I want to ask it myself, and say, hey, I have a question I would like to ask. And we will be able to call on you and be able to unmute you so that we can have not everybody speaking over each other. So you will message either to everyone or specifically to the hosts, and to inform us that you have a question about the subject matter, and that we can have various folks. We'll say we have 2 or 3 people that want to speak about the specific subject matter that we're discussing. And we'll also have the opportunity to ask each of the speakers as well, hey, is there any questions from the audience to speak about this specific topic, and we can move on. So if anybody has any questions or any you can always ask in the chat box, or just speak up. Just say, hey, I have a quick question before we start. So right now, does anybody have any questions that I can clarify? Take that as a no. So some housekeeping for today. And now we'll have each of our speakers introduce themselves. And we're going to start from the panel. We'll start with Patsy Ma, then Danny Raffel, and then Steve Donnell. So Patsy, I'll let you introduce yourself. You're on mute. It's okay. Just take yourself off mute. DJ, if you can help her.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Patsy Ma. I'm a CCIM. I've been in the commercial real estate industry since the early 80s. Started out with working for a developer and then later on getting into brokerage. Right now I'm with BP International Inc., a firm that started in 1987, and we specialize in retail. And also we have sales, management, and leasing. In the portfolio, we also have managed portfolio with offices, medical, as well as industrial. Look forward to speaking with everyone today. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. Thank you, Patsy. And now, next slide. We'll have Danny Raffle.
Good afternoon. Danny Raffle, President RPM Commercial Real Estate, doing business as RPM Property Management. We manage properties throughout LA, Orange County, and also Las Vegas. You can read my spiel there on the screen. Thank you for having me today, and look forward to an interesting dialogue.
Perfect. Thank you, Danny.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Steve Donnell. I'm president of Fed Receiver Inc., where I serve as a state and federal court-appointed receiver, and I take over a lot of commercial and residential property throughout the country. I'm also president of Jalmar Properties. We are a full-service real estate property management firm. We manage all property types in primarily the Western U.S., and I also am a property management standard of care expert witness and president of Donnell Expert Services. I do a lot of work in the premises liability and habitability and fiduciary duty space as it relates to commercial and residential real estate.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. And myself, I'm head of Williams Capital Group. For our private money, our alternative lender. We are a mortgage debt fund, and we provide, that alternative financing for residential and commercial properties. So I'm here with President of CCIM Greater LA and the moderator. So for today, so thank you guys, thank you everybody for being here today, and we'll get started. So to give everybody an overview of kind of the specific areas that we're going to be speaking about, we're going to be talking about COVID, right, at your property and legal considerations. We may be going over specific product types, small business relief. Also, we're dealing with tenants and also different stakeholders and the types of relationships that you have, in essence, understanding trust in those relationships that you have with your each of the stakeholders. And of course, we'll have some topics about rent collection. But I'll start off with the number one thing that I think we all kind of can agree on looking at the benefits and importance of having a professional property manager or professional property management in general during a crisis like COVID. So I'm happy to start us off with that question, and we can go from there.
I'll start first.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this very unprecedented time, as well as difficult time, having professional property management is a true benefit to any property owner, and preservation of property value as well as retention of tenants.
Mm-hmm.
In this time, I think the most important thing is tenant retention and cash flow. And having a professional property manager with knowledge, they would be able to give the client up-to-date information, say, with different cities, safer at home or eviction moratorium guidelines. And every different city issues different opening guidelines as well. Sometimes it's pretty overwhelming for individual owners, but having professional management that can ease that stress a lot. And also at times, forming relationships and tenant retention and having rapport with tenants is very important.
I think that there are a lot of issues that come into play right now involving safety and also service, and making sure that as property managers and or property owners that we comply with the standard of care. As was mentioned, as Patsy mentioned, there are guidelines that we have to follow as property managers, dealing with evictions, moratoriums, rental increases, and making sure that we don't violate any of those restrictions. And I think it's also important to ensure that we're taking reasonable action in the commercial properties to deal with social distancing, signage, policies and procedures, to attempt to make our tenants as safe as possible. And I think the other thing that comes into play is providing a level of comfort for the tenants. This is a stressful time. Tenants are concerned, they're nervous. Some of the tenants have not yet come back to their buildings. Some of the tenants never closed down. I have a number of retail properties where the tenants were considered essential services, so they never shut down. And trying to provide management in a way that provides a level of continuity and comfort for the tenants, which is going to drive home the importance of tenant retention and the ability long-term to raise rents or to maintain and keep tenants. So I think those are some of the key elements that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, adding on to that, it's what we've always maintained is having a really strong relationship with our tenants, as well as the owners. If we know what's happening with the tenants, it puts us in a better position to deal with them on a personal level. And right now, over the last few months, it's been very personal for a lot of our, for everybody. We've taken on 4 buildings the last 3 weeks where we've had people that believe they can manage their own properties, and they've been so overwhelmed with all the requests coming in and the COVID restrictions and the depending on which city they are, the tenant notification forms that we don't have to pay rent and we'll pay you back whenever we want. And the landlords are just overwhelmed, and understanding the legal issues, understanding how to manage a property and what to look for. I mean, on a normal day, everything from we always talk about, like from the roof line to the bottom line, there's so many issues that have to be dealt with properly. And now more than ever, people are really looking to management firms to be able to help and assist them with dealing with all of the problems that are coming up, rather than just a leaky roof or a broken pipe. Now you've got the COVID issues and keeping office buildings clean, and Steve was mentioning signage. And so it's been very challenging. I still have my hair, but it's been a real challenging 4 or 5 months now. So.
No, you guys definitely brought up a lot of points here that we could really extrapolate on. And I think the most consistent thing that you guys have really shared is really the guidelines, and making sure that they're not being violated. I mean, can you guys share a little bit about a little bit of a narrative of what it looks like, keeping up with the rules that constantly change? I think when in March, there was one set of rules, and can you guys share about the evolution of how the rules have changed and what it's like to manage a property during this time, like when it comes to specifically to the guidelines?
That is one of the challenges that some of these guidelines have changed. Certainly the moratoriums on rental increases in certain properties, and then the evictions have come into play, and the tenants are aware of that. Many of them are aware that the landlords cannot do anything. And so our hands are tied. I happen to manage some HOAs as well. And so we have pools and gyms and recreation facilities. And some of those regulations have just recently changed, and pools in apartment buildings as well. In LA County, the initial limitation on pools when they reopened was that you could only have a maximum of 10 people in a pool, or 25% of the approved occupancy, whichever was less. Just recently, that guideline changed to 50% of occupancy with no maximum allowable occupancy at any one time in the pool. Gyms have their own entirely separate type of opening criteria, so that if there's gyms in an HOA, or if you have tenants that are gyms, we have restaurants that opened and then they've shut back down. So as a landlord, we need to make sure that our tenants are not violating these regulations, and also as managers that our own facilities are not violating them. It's really important to keep up to date with them for safety and legal reasons.
I find it difficult in keeping up with a lot of the changing guidelines or the orders. Every city has different orders and every city has different end dates. So very difficult for management to plan out, like, what are we going to do in September or what are we going to do in October? So that's a difficulty right now on planning, I feel. Like Steve said, in terms of signage is very important for all the public areas, encouraging mass social distancing. And if people are sick, don't enter the facility, things like that. We also have even elevators. People are wondering, should we even have more than one person in an elevator because they can't keep the social distancing of 6 feet apart or maximum 2. So a lot of these are, a lot of the guidelines are different also from city to city and product type to product type. So it is quite overwhelming for property managers to keep up with the different cities and different opening guidelines right now.
Don't have much more to add to that. It's yeah, I mean, our hands are tied in so many ways, from collections, which are, they pay, they don't pay. We're not sure what's going to happen from city to city. I was thrilled when Vegas opened up. A little scared. I have no desire to go there right now, but at least the mom and pops tenants are probably my biggest concern. I take everybody's problems to heart, and when you've got a nail salon and a hair salon that can't open for months, but you got people jamming past each other in Home Depot and Costco, there's no there's no fairness to the way the system is working, and letting the government try to control what's happening. Not sure they're doing the best job. They're doing the best they can, but we're really on the front line, and it's been challenging, not just from the tenant, but dealing with the landlords. We're become, I think, psychologists, because we've got to deal with the landlords who are really unhappy. They want to get paid. They want to know what's happening, and we really have no answers to give them, other than here's what the law, here's what it says, here's all we can do right now.
Right. And we do have a question here from Gregory. Gregory, are you on the line? Gregory? He can't talk. Okay, no problem. He wanted to ask, should we post COVID signs at our apartment common areas, and what kind of signage? He had a specific question to that.
If the apartments have elevators, I think absolutely. I think there needs to be some guideline. And also, if the apartments have pools, I think that there's some standard stock, social distancing, use of masks, not congregating. If the apartments have a community room, what is the use of the community room? Does it have a gym? What are the policies and procedures? Have those procedures been disseminated? So yes, I think it is important to have some level, but is it a mid-rise or a high-rise, or is it a garden style, 2-story walk-up? So I think it really depends on the configuration, but I think generic signage is going to provide some safety, maybe some risk mitigation for the owners, to ensure that people are not congregating, and also following any required mask usage. I think the use of generic signage for those purposes at a minimum is important. And then depending upon the amenities of the community, there would need to be specialized signage based on what type of amenity exists.
Perfect. Well, thank you. So he also shared that notices in vacant apartments for prospective tenants that are viewing an empty apartment. I mean, I think there are notices you have to provide as well too for showing properties as well, correct?
Yeah, and I know a lot of owners are doing some virtual tours as well. I think that's become, much more prevalent, online tours, and recordings of vacancies. So that's occurring as well. Danny, I don't know what your experience is with that.
What we're doing is there's the car has a COVID form that everybody that comes in has to sign, and there's little booties you haven't put on, and showings are, you just limit it to obviously one at a time. And, but we've had, fortunately, on the residential side, which is minimal for us, everybody's paying and no complaints. So we've been real blessed.
Okay, perfect, guys. Well, thank you. There's we have another question from Sharon Carr. Sharon, did you want to hop on?
Francisco, yes, I was just curious because some of these properties actually have a management company and some are just broker to owner relationships. And so I was curious how you guys would see a healthy synergy between brokers and managers to assist tenants during this time.
So the relationship between the brokers showing spaces and that interface between the owners, if I understand the question correctly, I mean, I think it's obviously incumbent upon ownership and management to relay the policies to the brokers. So if we have a commercial tenant and the broker showing the space, making sure obviously that broker is adhering with the policies of the building, again, whether there's elevators, common areas, congregating, sign-in sheets, whether there's temperature checks being taken. The last thing you want is your broker to violate your own policies, unknowingly. So I think the education is very, very important between the ownership directly and the brokers, so that the owners don't find themselves in a situation where they may be subjected to any type of liability.
Thanks, Steve. I have a couple of clients that actually have restaurants and they're in cahoots with the landlord. And so, we've been asked to come in as brokers to negotiate with the landlord and there is no management in place. So it's a little bit of a different scenario.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a direct contact between the brokers and the owners,
Yeah.
Which, I don't know that that's any different if it's just, lease negotiation. I mean, obviously that there's a lot of that going on right now. And I think it's important for the owners to really try to appreciate the position that some of the tenants are in. And, some of the owners are really managing more for cash flow. Others are managing more for value. Maybe they're looking at a sale. It might be really damaging to a property owner to renegotiate a lease at a lower rate, that they're locked into a lower rate. That's going to impact their NOI and you're going to have a reduction in value when you cap that lower NOI. Or some owners are going to be really, really keyed into cash flow. And maybe they'll sign a 1 or 2 year short-term lease at a reduced rate just to keep that tenant. So I think it's really important that the broker, if the broker is representing the owner, that the broker has a clear understanding what the owner's objectives are. And then if the broker is representing the tenant dealing directly with the owner, that the owner is able to effectively communicate the position that the owner is taking so that there's no surprises with the tenants. I've got a number of commercial tenants that are wanting to do negotiations. And some of them have just come out straight out, asked for free rent. And across the board, we're really not offering free rent. It's just not a door that we're willing to open. But we are willing to forego rent payments and allow for payback over a period of time. But rent abatement is just not in my vocabulary right now. And it's important for the brokers that are representing some of the tenants in the properties we have, to clearly understand that. I'm not talking about your typical ordinary free rent on a longer term lease. I'm talking about COVID abatements, and we're really working hard to stay away from that.
We've offered on some of our tenants, depending on who they are. Some we gave some rent deferment for 3 months with payment back over a 6-month period. Some of them have actually, we just said, look, we'll give you. They'd owed for 3 months, and we'll say, we'll just knock 20% off of what you owe, and they'll write a check. It helps them out. They feel like they're getting something. It depends on basically the MO of the landlord and how strong. The larger the landlords are, and if they're REITs or, they're not giving anything up, period. And then there's most people understand. There are some people on the tenant restaurant. We have one, they just stop paying. Period. What'll happen down the line, we don't know yet. And they could afford to pay, and they can't afford to walk away from $1 million in improvements. So you have to look at each case individually, who you're dealing with. But it has to be long-term, but Steve is definitely correct. I mean, I have somebody right now in the middle of a refi, and you can't just walk away from the money.
Right.
I ditto Danny and Steve, because for most of our portfolio, we have not like given discounted rent on the COVID issue, but work on deferment. But lately, we've been experiencing from the retail tenants, especially the chains, they've hired firms like Cushman and Wakefield and other big firms, and they send out massive letters to the landlord just demanding rent abatement for a number of months. So a few of the chain tenants have been doing that. But that's initially they sent it to all the landlord, and I think that to see who would come back and negotiate one by one with them. But in most of my clients and also the tenancy we deal with, we look at, first of all, when they renegotiate the lease, how viable the use is at that location, what is the credit worthiness of this tenant, are they going to survive long term? Even giving them a rent deferment, how long of a deferment will it need for them to pay back? How long the existing lease is? So it's been more individualized, tenant by tenant, right, in recent months to look at everybody's situation differently.
I had just yesterday an interesting situation where a tenant had been, there was 1 month that the tenant, I agreed to allow them to pay their rent on the back end of their lease. And they paid the other April and May, and then we negotiated on June. We tacked that on and we extended the term. Yesterday, they contacted me and said that their payroll protection funds had run out, and they were essentially in jeopardy of going out of business. And what that tells me is their operations for the last 90 days had really been false and fake. And I'm wondering how many other tenants are out there that have been just living on fumes. This was a firm that does their financial services firm, and they're not getting walk-in customers. So how many other businesses are out there that are still open just because of that PPP loan? And as those funds begin to run out, what type of an impact is that going to have? So that's a little disconcerting.
In recent days, I'm seeing that a lot of the tenants started negotiating or getting deferment in March, April. They're coming back. I can sense that they're coming back on the second wave. Now that 4 months have passed, some of them cannot open yet. So they're coming on the second wave of asking for help. And that's scary.
Yeah, I was going back to where we 08, 09, when we had a lot of major tenants went into bankruptcy, and basically it was to renegotiate their leases, what they owed, or they would just walk away. There may be something they had to pay out. And I think if this continues much longer, the mom and pops are going to have a hard time making it. And I think we're going to see bankruptcies going up. I heard Brooks Brothers did today. And again, once you're in bankruptcy, hey, we'll give you 10% of what we owe you. And then you decide if you want to keep us and we'll renegotiate our terms. Or do you take an empty space back and try to lease it out again? To who? So I think the landlords and I put myself in that position, we're in for a really rocky road coming up.
I'll also just quickly add a little anecdote that I'm in a unique position as a receiver as well as a landlord. So 1 minute I wear my receiver hat, and the next minute I'm a property manager. I was appointed as receiver a couple of months ago over a women's apparel distribution firm near downtown. They've got about 30,000 square feet. And I was actually, notwithstanding the fact that I just said, I'm not offering free rent, I, of course, went to the landlord and said, oh, this is horrible. We need a rent reduction or abatement. And so I was able to negotiate a temporary rent reduction for the company over which I'm receiver. And we were unable to move any of the women's product because of the shutdown. That has now started moving fairly rapidly. And we're selling to some of the major retailers across the country. It's women's tops and shirts and different clothing for women. But in the last couple of days, with a number of COVID cases, we've had a couple of cancellations of orders because some of the retailers are concerned about shutdowns in some of their jurisdictions. And these are buyers for retailers throughout the entire country. So it's interesting. It started pretty quickly, and now it's tapering off a little bit. So it'd be interesting to see what happens as these numbers continue to rise.
And you guys are giving such great insight as to, what's happening on the ground. And I think you guys hinted earlier, a little bit about, cash flow. And there's a topic here that, with landlords positioning going forward as they confront bankrupt tenants and tenants running out of PPP money and having these type of situations where they're being worried about another shutdown. Can you guys also shed light on a landlord's objective and like what their focus is? Because from what I'm hearing, there's long-term value or short-term cash flow. So can you guys elaborate more on that?
Well, I'll start with, depending on if the property or the landlord is leveraged or not. If they are highly leveraged, it depends on the type of loans. I think that the insurance companies, the CMBS, they're very strict and have not given any bricks to the borrowers. Whereas the local smaller banks, they have been, I've heard of a number of them giving 3 months deferral on principal only. So to help the owners or the landlord's cash flow. For the all cash owners that I work with, they are more open to just having cash flow. So yes, let's just get 50% rent now, have them pay back 50% 6 months later, 8 months later, and they're more open to that. So it really, I think some landlords are in a difficult spot if the lenders are not working with them.
One of the issues that I've come across in some of the properties that we manage or properties over which I'm receiver is there may be some covenant restrictions in the loan documents that would either allow or not allow certain modifications to the loan. So if the lender's loan based upon an expectation of an income stream and they've got a cash collateral provision on the leases, if, for example, the landlord is going to forgive rent or reduce rent rates or materially modify the lease, I think it's important for all landlords to make sure that there are not any type of restrictions in their loan documents where they may unwittingly be in violation of a loan provision, thereby causing a potential default action and putting their property in jeopardy and potentially subjecting themselves to a notice of default. So that's a lesson that you learn real quick once you get the notice from the lender to provide your quarterly rent roll, and then you say, whoops, I forgot, tenant XYZ, I reduced their rent by 20%, I didn't get permission. A lot of the servicers and the CMBS loans are really, really tough about that. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, excellent point. I think you're mentioning long-term, short-term. I mean, the value of any property is long-term, but today's climate, depending on the landlord, whether they're a cash owner or they have a loan in place, really depends on what they can offer. The hardest point is making the tenants understand the landlord's perspective. You turn on the news and all landlords are rich, wealthy, barons, and the poor tenants that can't pay their rent should get breaks. And why are they charging me rent in this hard time? But property taxes haven't been reduced, and the utility companies still want, everybody still wants their payments. Everything still has to be paid, and then there's those property managers that want to get paid every month too. So it's been very challenging, but we hope long-term everybody can work together, and maybe even these banks will understand the situation and not call in loans, because I don't think they actually want the properties back.
Another thing on the commercial properties, for those tenants where we have done some level of deferment or modification We are requiring the tenants to execute a confidentiality agreement. I know tenants chit chat, but we still go ahead and require the execution of the confidentiality agreement. Otherwise, we won't even engage in substantive negotiations. And I think it's probably a good idea that you'd want to include that with your commercial tenants so that you don't create a domino effect of every single tenant trying to get the same deal.
Very good.
Definitely. Very good point. And I think that's something else too. I mean, we have a question from Gregory again. Are rents for new prospective tenants, as you talk about, people sharing the deals they get, do you see new prospective tenants, their new rates, are they dropping? Is vacancy going up in Los Angeles or in the areas that you guys service?
I think that depends on property type. I've got, again, we don't do a lot of residential, but what we have is in Santa Monica, and we had a unit come vacant. And not only were we getting more rent, but I mean, we had people off the woodwork trying to get in to have showings, which, it happens to be a townhouse, but so there's people still out there with money. People still need to move. We're making deals on some industrial properties. I've got even some gyms, some restaurants are out there. Actually, there's a lot of restaurants out there looking for deals right now. We happen to represent a couple of them. We do some tenant rep here. So, I don't think there's a straight answer. I was talking with an industrial guy today over at Lee, and he said, their business is booming. There are really no reductions in rent, and their properties are full.
My portfolio is primarily retail, so I can see that our vacancy will be increasing. We don't know who's going to come back yet or come back successful because a lot of the tenants are still closed. Our medical managed properties are very stable and no problem with that. For offices, I see that the vacancy will be ticking up a bit because back in March, April already, some of the leases that will be expiring in October through December of this year, a couple of the tenants already said that they won't renew because they're used to working at home, used to working remotely. Then they realize the team doesn't really need to come in an office. So we have notices early about non-renewal. So I can see vacancy going up for offices and going up for retail. As far as rent yet, we are not reducing rent at this time. I think that will be a call in a later period. We're trying to keep all the rent as it was pre-COVID at this time.
The industrial properties we have remain essentially fully leased, and I'm involved in a couple of rent negotiations right now, and that's pretty strong. So I think the industrial, for well-located industrial, remains strong. The multifamily is very interesting. We manage some pretty low-end stuff, some middle market stuff, and then a little bit higher end. Interestingly enough, the lower-end properties, the rent-controlled kind of C plus, B minus class properties, most of those tenants seem to be okay, and I think some of them are getting unemployment, and the extra $600 a month has helped. And it's been surprising to me that I think some of the tenants in the lower end of the spectrum have done okay. The more expensive apartments, they similarly have done generally okay, although these are typically a little bit more sophisticated people, and I think they're playing games more. So I've got some apartment tenants that I really believe can afford to pay. They just simply haven't, and they're trying to play poker with me, and we'll see who wins. But what I found is in the middle, these are folks that are not getting unemployment and probably don't qualify for a lot of government assistance, and otherwise don't have a lot of deep pocket resources in the multifamily area. Those are the ones where I've seen some defaults and where I've seen a little bit of panic. So not in the low end, not in the upper end, but the middle of the road multifamily. For retail, for example, I have a property in Rancho Cucamonga, and I actually just renewed a lease at a lower rate with an existing tenant that was looking elsewhere. He came back to me and said he'd really just like to stay. He was happy with the management, and COVID hit, and he just felt comfortable being where he was, and had long discussions with the owners. And we reduced the rate, but we only signed an 18-month lease, and the lease renewal showed that or evidence that we would have a market rate adjustment at the end of 18 months. But the owners were willing to take about a 25% haircut on the base rent rate. And we also did a deferment on their CAM reconciliation for 2019, which they had also not paid, and we amortized that over the entire lease. We've got a couple of restaurants that are not paying at all or making partial rents. And I've got some other tenants, retail tenants. I'm not quite sure if they're just trying to play games or if they truly are hurting. We sent out a questionnaire asking for financial statements to provide us with evidence of their financial harm. And most of the tenants haven't provided those. So it's a bit of a wait and see game. So retail, mixed bag, multifamily for the most part okay. Industrial still very, very strong. We don't have a lot of office right now, but we have some smaller sort of B class office. And for the most part, they've been okay, with the exception of a couple tenants that have just up and walked out. That happened very quickly. That actually happened by the end of March. So I think that they were on the fringe to begin with.
Well, thank you. We have another question from the audience. Sharon Cars again. Did you want to ask your question?
Sure. So do you see properties being repurposed in the future due to a new change in need?
Well, I can tell we have one property that we just took on, and we're repurposing it right now from office to live work, trying to, work out of ways to, it's a property that can be done that way. But yeah, I think over the last couple of years, a lot of shopping centers have been repurposing anyways. And I think this is just speeding that up to a lot of the smaller properties where we're going to have to look at everything. Especially I don't know how you make a straight office building live work, but maybe we can. If we're creative enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the zoning allows for it.
Well, there's a nice repurposed office building project on Los Robles and Cordova, southwest corner. It's a high rise that they converted all to residential condos with penthouse and sold for thousands of dollars a foot.
Wow. I mean, that comp. Well, you guys have really shared a lot about, the different product types and, in essence, where they stand in your experience. But let's kind of shift gears to the relationships with the landlords and with each of the stakeholders in each transaction. I think, Danny, you mentioned somebody who, is taking on new projects about doing live work, and you Steve, you've shared multiple case studies about how people are playing poker. I mean, there has to be a strain on the relationships between the tenants and the landlords, property managers, attorneys. I mean, can you guys share more about the interpersonal dynamics of the relation of the property owners? Because how is relationship and trust between, how is it being tested? How is it not? I mean, what are the different dynamics for landlords, tenants, brokers, property managers, attorneys? I mean, are accountants getting involved with some of their tax implications as we see new things with the CARES Act? I mean, could you guys share a little insight from your perspective?
From my perspective, I think it is a very good time to have a property manager in between the landlord and the tenant. So that actually takes away any heated, I wouldn't say argument, but having a middle person to negotiate is better than a direct in terms of keeping good relationship. The other thing I want to say is that it's a time that tenant relations is extremely important. And moving forward, as I say that, we can see an uptick of vacancy. It will take longer for any units to be leased. So try to keep the good tenants as much as possible than losing it to another property. Relationship with landlord, we have seen our workload increase because it will be more constant report on cash flow, delinquency report. We probably do twice to 3 times a week on the properties to let the landlord know what, the health of their account. So what else is, as far as CPA and legal, I would leave it to the landlord to hire and decide on when to use CPA and legal consultant when they see fit for them to get involved.
I think that this is, obviously unprecedented times, and I think that it's more important than ever to maintain as good a relationship as possible with tenants. And my experience, it's been interesting. For example, I've had some tenants that I felt have been really, really open and honest with me, and especially early in this, in March, that retail tenant that I mentioned, it's a smaller tenant, and he sells carpet. He came to me in March. Well, he had already given notice to vacate because he said he needed storage, and he wanted to go to more of an industrial building where he would have front end retail, and he was only in retail at this retail center. So he had already given notice to vacate. But in March, he was still a tenant. He came and said, my business is shuttered. I don't have a lot of reserves, and I just had a baby. My wife just had a baby. And I said, you know what? I said, just don't worry about your rent. Worry about being safe. Let's talk in April or talk in May. He was planning on moving out in the end of May. And I said, just worry about your family, worry about your safety. And then he did come back and talk to me later. He ultimately did return the keys. But then he swung back around about 2 or 3 weeks later, and this was in the month of June. And he said, I never forgot how I told you I couldn't pay my rent. And he says, I was afraid that you were going to come down on me hard. And all you told me was to be safe and to worry about my family and my new baby. And I never forgot that. And he said, I want to come back to this shopping center because of you. And so although we had to reduce his rent, that was an example of, having a little bit of a human touch, paid enormous dividends. On the other hand, I have a national restaurant chain, I won't mention who I'm dealing directly with the owners. He has not paid any rent since March. He wanted a rent reduction and a rent abatement, and he did not want to repay any of his rent that we were going to tack on. He didn't want to pay any of that for over a year. And I just said, absolutely not. You're not being reasonable. And I've been very, very tough with him. And so I think you really have to look at each case individually. But I think it's more important than ever to really deal with good tenant relations. Make sure, though, that you're not setting yourself up for failure and you're not doing a deal with a tenant that they cannot otherwise comply with. And again, I don't know if this is the tip of the iceberg with the expiration of the PPP money or not. But that's something that I think we all, as property managers and property owners and brokers, we have to be very, very mindful.
Definitely agree. And right now, we have a few minutes left. We have about 10 minutes left, a little over 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers? And does anybody would like to share anything about their experience with property management? This is more of a roundtable discussion, and we welcome everybody in our membership and our community to participate in this dialogue. I mean, have you guys seen something that's different? Is there anything else that you would like to share and share with us about? Does anybody like to just unmute yourself and just have a contribution?
Well, thanks. Bye.
Share a quick, quick story. So I am actually the receiver, court-appointed receiver over a property that has an assisted living facility and an adult residential care facility. And we were in escrow. We're just getting ready to go into escrow to try to sell the property. And the facility won't allow visitors. They won't allow strangers. And we could not get the third-party inspections done that was necessary to get the financing in place. So the entire sales transaction terminated. And there was really nothing I could do about it. I couldn't force the assisted living facility to let the appraiser and the inspectors and the buyers go through their properties. So, how do you ever prepare for something like that? So I think that's an example of the unique nature of this pandemic that we find ourselves in, and how does that impact the value of the real estate? And the lender on the property, who was expecting to get paid off, was fortunately very, very understanding. But that was a new one for me. Never seen that type of reason not to be able to sell a deal.
We do have one question here from Allison Lee. Allison, would you like to share?
Hi, I did hear Patsy mentioning live workplace, and but I couldn't get the location correct, so I just wanted to get a clarification on that location, so I can just look it up for reference. And then the other area that I just want to mention is obviously the patio dining has been almost a must for a lot of the restaurants in California. I've seen some actually photos of in Dumbo in Brooklyn, actually, that they turned a street into squares of a dining where people are sitting 6 foot apart from each other, and it's actually becoming almost artful to spill people around, and just wanted to note that as a side note.
Sure. Allison, the conversion project, actually it's a condo conversion. I think the live work one is Danny's project. The one that's in Pasadena is an office building that's converted to all condos at the southwest corner of Los Robles and Cordova. I think the penthouse went for over $1,000 a foot, I was told.
Thank you.
Yeah, the live work that we have is in Redondo Beach. It's not on the market at the present time, so can't give you any more information about that. They're across the country. What you mentioned as far as the streets, our offices are in El Segundo, and the city is. They closed off one of the streets where there were 3 restaurants, and they're using the whole block for tables. So a lot of the smaller cities are really cooperating with the restaurants to try to help out. It's great to see.
That's right. Laguna Beach actually has parallel diagonal parking turned into an outdoor patio that's been pretty successful.
We have someone who's raising their hand, Bob.
Yeah, Bob Khalsa. I just want to share that as a property manager, and I've spoken to some of the other brokers and managers in a couple of different states that I know. I think what is the real picture is going to come once the PPP runs out, once all the tax benefits and everything else runs out. Then the true pictures, and I know there was a passing reference that was made, but then the real picture is going to come of sustainability of businesses, how many wind up, and then your true vacancy rates and your final absorption figures. All these numbers right now are all sort of moving targets. You really can't base. Lenders are not basing them. When in a sales transaction, they're not going by what is the current situation. That's why they need more reserves, and they're being very conservative. So from management point of view, I think the true picture is going to come out maybe a month and a half, when all the PPP, everything else is exhausted. Now the true, and the people who are getting disposable income in terms of extra benefits of unemployment, when all that runs out, then the demand and supply things will settle down, and then you really know which businesses are surviving and which are not, and how many of your tenants can actually stay in place.
I think you make a really good point, Bob, and I think that's where I was going before, where I see bankruptcies are going to, pop up in the next 2-3 months, and there's a lot of people are, whether they're large or small, are going to be very affected, and it's going to have a trickle-down effect, I think, to all of us in the long run.
Definitely. And we're seeing them, just to cite a couple, NPC International, for those of you in retail, filed for bankruptcy. They're one of the largest Pizza Hut operators and has Wendy's and other operations, over 1,000 units, had over 900 million in corporate debt that swallowed them whole. And then you have other operators like Dunkin' Donuts corporate, who is shutting down 500 stores. So we're definitely seeing a lot of folks, shifting and adapting to the situation. And like you mentioned, Brooks Brothers is another retailer, and again, we're going to keep seeing them pop up continuously for the months to come. But right now, I think we have 5 minutes left, but I'm not sure if we have enough time to go through any large questions. Does anyone have any other questions or any comments? For those of you who have just joined us, this is a roundtable discussion. We're having a conversation about property management, and this is for the community and for you to ask any questions about what you're dealing with, and to, share any case studies that you think that would be, shed more light on the commercial real estate market.
Well, I'll see. So nobody's. I was surprised by your comment about Pizza Huts and the donut shops. We represent once my son-in-law, who's got kind of a fast casual, but it's a delivery, and they're in Colorado, but they're opening up across, slowly across the country. They just opened up in Chicago, and they're doing phenomenal. He had actually got a PPP loan, and it took him a while to figure out how to return it. They have about 16 locations, all of which have not been affected at all. Again, I mean, we're in Southern California, drive by an In-N-Out Burger. They're as busy as they've ever been. So the takeout places, the places that were set on delivery, most of them are doing really well. We have another small chicken. Actually, they have 2 concepts, and they're opening new locations right now. So, people are taking advantage. They're going, what can I find? We know we're going to have restaurants that are going to come up. They're going to have kitchens. We can move in quickly. And so there are people out there that are going to take advantage, maybe get lower rents if there are vacancies.
Another interesting thing that it'll be interesting to see if the force majeure issue, how that's played out. I am aware of a case. It was somewhere in the Midwest. I don't recall the exact state. Commercial tenant that alleged force majeure, and indeed the court did find that given the lockdown situation, and they were not an essential tenant, the court issued a ruling, the majority of which was in the tenant's favor, and they terminate their lease. They did have to pay some of their outstanding rent, but at a severely discounted rate. But they were able to get out of the lease. So it'll be interesting to see what type of litigation comes into play on this force majeure issue, and whether or not that will create any level of precedent, certainly here in California at a minimum.
I just want to add that following what Danny said, in the recent months of receiving sales volumes from drive-through restaurants, we see close to 20% quarter compared to last year's March, April, May, that the drive-through restaurants have a higher increased income. So that's a good thing.
We have some good news.
Yes.
But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here on the call. Thank you, Danny, Steve, and Patsy, for facilitating this conversation and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate you really sharing your experience and your time with us so graciously today. These are our board members, and they are here to support our community. And if you guys are looking to get in touch with our board and get in touch with our team, we're very active in the marketplace, and we welcome conversations with each and every one of our members. So please join. If you're not a member, join CCIM Greater Los Angeles, be a part of this community, and we're happy to have you and have more conversations and see how we can support each other during this time. So again, thank you so much for the call, and thank you for our speakers, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your afternoon. All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Francisco.
Bye.
Thank you. All right. Take care.